I found a secret bunker deep within the London Underground system. What is it? Andrew asked. I'd fallen behind after stopping to look into a small alcove in the tunnel filled with old pipes. I reached for a small, dull red piece of metal, placed at chest height. The thin aluminum had been folded into the shape of a deer. My dad used to make these out of Coca-Cola cans, I said, holding it up to my flashlight. He'd give them to us for Christmas and birthdays, just little things, but they piled up over time. I've got dozens lining my desk. He must have left this one here, hoping I'd find it. So we're heading in the right direction. Kay said, his directions are really accurate, aren't they? It had been 6 days since my father vanished into the subterranean labyrinth of London, but this was the first time I thought I might actually find him. Silently, I slipped the small animal into my pocket, trying to nurture the fragile hope it offered. He must mean a lot to you, C whispered. He's very kind, I replied. Everyone hears schizophrenia and immediately thinks psycho, but it's not like that at all. He lives in a terrifying world, full of voices and strange patterns. He's vulnerable, not dangerous. He must be having a really severe episode to come down here. You said he's done this before, Andrew said. At least that means he knows what he's doing. Yeah, I replied. Except the last time he came down here, he was only 23. Now he's 55, and climbing stairs is a struggle. I held up the strange piece of paper with his directions, which included sections that required jumping 3 meters onto hard concrete. How could he have possibly managed that? I've never heard of a communications bunker in this part of the underground maze, William said. I'm not sure we ever will, Andrew interrupted, shooting his brother an irritated glance. If he's where the letter says. We'll find it, William stammered, quickly adapting. We know everything down here. No one knows this city better than us. How deep are we now? C asked after a few minutes of silence. I honestly don't know, but I'd guess 60 meters, William replied. The air has a certain quality once you descend past a certain depth, Andrew added. You get to recognize it after a while. I never knew all of this was down here, she responded. My dad was obsessed with it, I said. He'd research everything hidden down here, but this bunker was his favorite place of all. When I found the note with the directions, I knew what it would say before I even opened it. He's the smartest man I've ever met, funny, passionate, and he has. He has his own unique spark, but he overestimates himself. He thinks he's invulnerable, and I knew he'd get himself hurt down here. You're a good son, Kay said. You've come to the right people, William added, turning his head to smile at me. Silence returned, and I cast my eyes downwards, trying to ignore the stark, monochromatic concrete tunnel and how it made me feel. Finally, the two brothers led us to a creaking watertight door, hanging wide open on rusty hinges. Cautiously, William squeezed through the stiff door, and the rest of us followed. I quickly found myself standing in a massive reservoir, easily the size of 10 football fields. One of the nearby walls was carved with the inscription, ACWW Ansley Wells Reservoir 39, and I excitedly told everyone, this must be the reservoir he mentioned in the letter. Around us, dozens of red brick pillars rose from the water and touched the vaulted ceiling, all perfectly aligned in receding rows. Andrew moved ahead with his map open in his hand, muttering softly to himself. It shouldn't be here, William said after glancing at his brother. I expected a small branch tunnel, something unmarked, but nothing. There's nothing in any of the documents about this. I think he's just crazy. Ahem, Andrew cleared his throat, and William immediately fell silent. Maybe you just haven't heard of it, C asked. No, Andrew replied. We would know about something like this. If there were even a rumor of this section of tunnel, the urban exploration community would swarm in like ants. This is unbelievable. If we knew about this section of tunnel, we'd be running tour down here every few days. The others agreed, but is there a way through? I asked. I mean, if the directions he left me are accurate, don't we have a good chance of finding him? That's right, he replied, as long as we can get to the manhole and ladder your dad described. Let's go, William said, and one by one, we began to wade through the ankle-deep water. But we hadn't gone far before something caught my attention. There's something in the water, I said. "What is it?" Andrew asked. I walked towards it, knowing it would be faster to retrieve than explain. The water wasn't very deep, and I cautiously reached in to pick up the object. It was an axe. William said, also following close behind me. "Strange." He walked away, and I heard him tell Kay not to worry. However, Andrew, who had also seen the strange marks along the axe's handle, remained right beside me. He looked at me meaningfully, and I nodded before dropping the axe back into the water. It was blood, deeply soaked into the wood grain. "Click-clack, he will break your back, obey his laws, and go the right way." The words were spray-painted in brilliant white inside the rough surface of a drainage pipe. "Creepy," C whispered before forcing a laugh. We all tried to laugh along, as if, somehow, we could ward off the fear with bad acting. At least the laughter gave us the courage to continue. The conduit was wide enough for all four of us to walk abreast, and so far, my dad's directions hadn't failed. As predicted, we soon came across a precarious ladder rising from the middle of the conduit to an open trapdoor. The climb to the top was about 9 meters, and the two brothers wasted no time in dictating the order of ascent. "It'll be one at a time, in case the ladder can't bear much weight. I'll go last, as I'm the heaviest," I said, patiently waiting as each person climbed the ladder and disappeared. Just before Andrew ascended, he stopped and saw me nervously shining my flashlight into the darkness. Both he and I knew there would be a few tense seconds when I was completely alone. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah, sure," I replied. "Just hurry up." He nodded and began to climb. The sounds of his footsteps were dreadful. I patiently waited for him to ascend, but when he was about halfway up, we both heard a distinct sound echo from behind. Click! It was a short, solitary click in the silence. Clack! Again, louder this time. I couldn't see more than a few meters in any direction, and my chest constricted with panic. Click! The water beneath my feet was churning. I watched in confusion as it began to rise above my ankles. I wasn't sure, but it seemed to be flowing uphill, although I hoped I was just disoriented and couldn't tell up from down. That made more sense, I thought, more sense than the idea that the water was fleeing from something in the darkness, something out there whose presence I could feel a tingling, an invisible charge, a presence hovering directly in my mind. As if it bypassed my senses and spoke directly to my brain, warning it to run. As soon as Andrew signaled it was safe, I grabbed the first rung and began to climb. CL, I stopped, not intending to. I was halfway up, but the sound was too close, forcing me to look down to check. I saw nothing but swirling water. Click-clack. It was so loud it felt as if it was coming from right behind my shoulder. I decided not to wait to see how close it was and scrambled up the last rungs, my hands shaking and clumsy. I kept worrying I'd fall, but a primal need to escape seized me and urged me onward. Click-clack-thump, click-thump, the entire ladder vibrated. Something was climbing behind me, and by the way the metal groaned, it was enormous. I felt my entire body tense with terror, and I practically leapt onto the last rungs. As soon as I cleared the trapdoor, I grabbed the cover and slammed it shut with all my strength. "What's down there?" Andrew asked. "Nothing," I said, unsure if I wanted to believe what my eyes had fleetingly seen in my panicked rush in the dark. My flashlight filled the room with sickly white light. Behind us, a pipe dripped, while Andrew wrestled the door shut with a deafening rusty screech. Finally, we had found the bunker, or at least the door my dad had described. Now in a small room, moving our lights around, we saw 3 single beds. The mattresses were half covered with rolled-up khaki sleeping bags, creating jagged, uneven shadows. In the center of the room was a table with a worn deck of cards and a 10,000-piece jigsaw puzzle lying face down. "I thought this was a World War II bunker," C asked as she picked up an old Walkman CD player from under a pillow. "Unless someone has been here since then." "The last time my dad could have come down here was around 1996, I said. "He never mentioned anyone living here, just gas masks, old uniforms, and ancient papers." We continued into the next room where we found a small canteen. From there, the bunker expanded into a labyrinth of industrial tunnels, walls covered in inanimate gauges and steel capacitors. Choosing randomly, we followed one of the tunnels to a small dormitory containing only 4 bunk beds. All were unmade and empty. Beneath one of the beds was an unlocked trunk filled with women's clothing. Buried beneath underwear and coveralls was a small book titled *Millennial Apocalypse, The Way Bug and the Modern Mayan Prophecy. "Preppers," I said. "Clearly, it's not just your dad who knows about this place." Andrew replied, "Someone else must have thought this was a great place to hide and came here after him. It looks like they arrived well prepared." I said, before chuckling softly. "It's funny because the AK-era is the only apocalypse my dad didn't believe in." "How long have they been down here?" C asked. I walked over to a nearby corkboard where a calendar was pinned, and I flipped through the pages. The last marked date was October 24, 2011. A small square was crossed out with a purple marker. All previous dates were marked, going back to January, with mentions of birthdays, anniversaries, and even Easter. "They really spent all that time down here?" C asked. "Someone did," I replied. "Let's keep going," William said. "I want to know how big this place is." We continued exploring for at least another 2 hours. We found a dozen more beds, though not all of them appeared to have been used. One of the larger rooms had been converted into a kind of common living space with tables and chairs, and another was a small gym filled with collapsible exercise equipment. Surprisingly, very little of the bunker was dedicated to living space. Most of the rooms were used for storage, and we found large cold storage rooms filled with withered, rotting meat hanging in the dark. Beneath them, man-sized sacks of grain and oats were stacked like firewood, their contents crushed and stale. There were generators, water filters, distillation equipment, lathes, presses, 6 types of fuel, books, and enough medical supplies to shame a hospital. There was even a room with half a dozen UV lamps wired over some dead plants. This wasn't a half-hearted attempt to survive the apocalypse. They had prepared incredibly thoroughly, but now they were gone. Despite hours of searching, we kept finding new doors, new rooms, even new levels. The bunker seemed endless. Finally, William and Andrew decided we needed to rest. I was standing at the threshold of the 4th sublevel, eager to continue searching for my dad, when they convinced me to leave and return to the entrance so we could regroup and discuss what we had found. Reluctantly, I agreed, and we quickly retraced our steps, only to freeze at the sound of someone else moaning in the very first room we had passed through. My heart leapt with fear and tired anxiety. What if we were under attack? But there was something about the sounds that was eerily familiar. When I suddenly realized, I rushed forward without explanation, causing indescribable panic in the others. "Dad!" I cried as I stumbled into the room and found my father. He looked startled to see me, but he didn't turn or call my name. He never took his eyes off the door he was trying to close. His face looked stretched out of shape, and it took me a few seconds to realize it was because he was afraid in a way I had never seen before. "Dad, it's okay. I'm here," I said, stepping forward. "These are my friends. We've come to get you out." "No," he cried. "We have to close it. We have to close it." I was about to ask why, but then I heard a click-clack. I felt my skin crawl as if possessed. I rushed to help my father. It was unusual to see my dad so terrified, and I think that's why I felt overcome by such primal fear. Yes, that, and the memory of that presence in the tunnel. Everyone else was confused and shouted questions, but I ignored them, pushing with all my strength against the rusty, watertight door. "Click-clack," I heard C cry out, and I was suddenly grateful to be behind the door and unable to clearly see what might be on the other side. But I had a good clue it wasn't good when William and Andrew suddenly appeared beside me, pale with terror, and pushed with all their might. C joined in, and soon, with all of us trying, the door finally slammed shut, and my dad turned the lock, sliding the thick metal bars into place. "I thought you said there was nothing down here," C cried, turning to face our 2 guides. "What the hell is on the other side of that door?" I decided to let William answer while I shifted my attention to my father. He was on his knees, gasping for breath. "What's going on?" I asked. "I'm sorry," he said, tears in his eyes. And with that, he pushed me aside and ran, sobbing, back into the darkness. "Is it human?" she asked, staring through the tiny window set in the door. "Does it look human?" William said, his voice almost irritated. "Well, it has 2 arms and 2 legs," she replied. "It has a head, I think. It's just waiting." Then it must be human, he said with a mocking shrug. 2 arms, 2 legs, and some godforsaken ghostly glow. We don't have answers, Andrew said, stopping the argument before it started. We don't know anything, but I think if we all voted, no one here would want to try and get past it. I certainly don't, I said. Maybe we'll laugh about it when we get to the surface, but right now I can't think of anything worse than going back the way we came. So I want to exhaust every other option, because whatever's out there is scaring me to death. Do you guys think there's another way out? C asked. Worth checking, I replied, and I still need to find my dad. This is one of the largest underground facilities I've ever seen, Andrew said. It makes sense that it would have more than one entrance. Is this what I think it is? Andrew asked. We huddled around him and stared at the scattered sketches on one of the walls. At first glance, it looked like a square mushroom or a top-heavy wine cork, but the longer we looked, the more details emerged. Dormitories, cooking, food, grains, C mumbled as she squinted, reading the faint lettering beside it. Level 1. It's a map, I muttered. The preppers must have explored this place like us. I think so too, Andrew replied. But look, Level 2 has storage, fuel, sanitation, electronics. Level 3 has water filtration, distilled water, UV lamps. Level 4 is just drains, but it keeps going, William said, pointing to the lower levels on the map. The lines were crude and covered in question marks. The map was clearly incomplete. There's more here, I said, showing everyone a notebook I was flipping through. Level 5, a few metal coffins, vases, beautiful paintings, copies of ones I've seen in the London Museum. The ones in the museum are fakes, these are real. A vault to protect valuable culture, perhaps. Level 6, strange-looking computers, at least no need to worry about bugs. 2 sets powered by vacuum tubes, all broken. Level 7, noisy machinery down here makes my teeth ache. Purpose, Level 8. File cabinets everywhere, mostly empty. Still some government documents, all redacted. Logos and departments erased. British and American flags on the walls both look strange. Wrong colors, wrong number of stars, wrong stripes, Illuminati. Level 9, too dark to see, flashlight battery low, will return later, at least saw stairs down to another level. How deep is this place? They don't mention an exit, C said. But they didn't explore everything, I replied. Could it be? She asked. How could they have lived here all that time without exploring everything? How big is this damn place, as if it was built from the bottom up? We'll have to go down and see for ourselves, I said. As we descended, each of us had our own unsettling observations. C, for example, noticed that many of the paintings on the 5th floor weren't copies, but slight variations of famous works. When asked if they were fakes, her answer was somewhat strange. No, I don't think so, she said. This one here is an almost perfect carbon copy of one of Monet's early sketches, except this is a full canvas painting instead of just a rough sketch, so maybe the forger used the wrong version. I doubt it, she replied. The sketch was only excavated a year or 2 ago. We continued past the dark, basalt coffins, the red wood caskets, the man-sized urns, and the old, sagging paintings until we reached level 6. Here, we found ourselves surrounded by an unusual army of upright machines with glass faces. They vaguely resembled computers but lacked any interface I could recognize. As described in the diary, a few of them had dusty, cracked vacuum tubes, but the others lacked them entirely. I might have thought them modern antiques if not for one of the machines bearing the small inscription, magnetic resonance safe display. That technology didn't exist when vacuum tubes were in use, and this absurdity confused me. But I didn't know what it meant, so I didn't tell the others. As it was, we were forced to rush through level 7 to avoid the awful smell of ozone emanating from an army of humming machines. Their glass windows glowed with an eerie blue light that sparked if you got too close. William even got a burn when he wiped dust from one of them, and in doing so, revealed a strange 4-fingered streak on the glass that had somehow been created from the inside. It was almost a relief when we found level 8, which contained nothing but endless file cabinets. Unlike the diary's description, we found them 100% empty and were forced to silently thread our way through their chaotic arrangement until William finally cried out, "Where are the stairs the diary mentioned?" God knows, I replied. This place is a labyrinth. I'm not sure I even want to find it anymore. Kay's voice sounded strangely in the darkness. Why? I asked. If there's another way out, there's another way in. I couldn't say why it hadn't occurred to me before, but the thought hit me like a physical blow. I stood frozen, as did William and Andrew, and only C continued to wander, seemingly unaware of the impact her words had on us. Don't you think, Andrew mumbled, we should go back? William asked. Guys, C cried, I think I found something. She was standing by a pile of cabinets pulled to block a small staircase. It had all the hallmarks of a hasty and desperate barricade. Should we? I asked. Click. In the harsh silver light of my flashlight, the air was thick with falling dust. One of the cabinets was thrown aside and tumbled down the pile. I was paralyzed by a jolt of terror that seized me, my eyes wide and mouth agape in a silent scream. Clack! Another cabinet was lifted and thrown aside, falling like dominoes. Click-clack! A hand emerged from beneath the twisted metal pile. The palm was pale and strangely large. It pushed more and more cabinets aside until, finally, a head appeared. It dangled precariously from a broken neck, with a pair of milky, opaque eyes and a drooling mouth. The pathetic, sagging head wore a police helmet, and from the neck down, it wore a buttoned police uniform like something directly from the Victorian-era. Strapped to its hip was a strange-looking truncheon connected to a rusty power pack by dozens of coiled copper wires. It was enormous, not muscular, but just massive, as if it had come straight from another world. Its huge, fumbling hands looked large enough to crush my head, and as if to signal its intent, the monster's head jerked from right to left with a sickening click, and it stepped forward. William acted first, launching himself in a desperate charge to kick the strange figure back down the stairs, but it was like kicking a tree. He hit the giant with a soft asterisk thud and fell backward onto the floor. He was struggling to get up when the giant hand of the policeman wrapped around his head and lifted him off the ground. Without hesitation, Andrew ran forward, drew a knife, and began frantically trying to free his brother. But the blade did nothing. No blood, no pain, no change in grip. It was like stabbing straw. I felt a gentle tug on my sleeve and almost screamed, but the hand that seized me was somehow familiar. A glance down showed my father, hunched over, a finger pressed to his lips, hiding in the shadows. He pulled me away just as C began to scream and loud cracking sounds echoed in the darkness. My father gripped the sides of my head to prevent me from turning around, and quietly, softly, he mouthed, "Follow Dad." Hesitantly, I stole one last glance back, but all I saw was a chaotic tableau, crisscrossing flashlight beams, and the desperate sounds of a struggle. "It's the only way," my father whispered when he saw me looking towards my friends. He quickly darted away, and to my shame, I followed. I wasn't sure what to expect, but my deepest hope was that he would lead me somewhere safe. I was profoundly disappointed when he led me to a small alcove formed by endless rows of cabinets and made us both squat down in the dark. This was our pathetic hiding spot, but all we could do was wait and hope that whatever was looking for us wouldn't look too closely. It seemed like a long time to wait there. There were horrible tearing sounds that I used all my courage to ignore, like someone ripping a phone book in half and breaking plastic pieces out there. Of course, I knew that wasn't what I was hearing. Not really. The screams made that clear. At first, they were panicked cries of pain, slowly transforming into moaning wails, then mournful sobs, and finally a desperate, sorrowful silence. Had the others hidden, fled, or died one by one? I couldn't tell. Still, we waited. At least there was a broken headlight lying somewhere on the floor, casting gloomy shadows. It allowed us to see when the pathetic black silhouette of the helmeted giant appeared nearby. The sight was so horrifying that I had to press my hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. Click-clack! Each step it took was emphasized by the stomach-churning sight of the monster's head jerking from side to side. I could feel that thing searching for us in the darkness, the same way you can feel someone hovering behind you. It was like a human, magnified not just in size, but in spirit and purpose. It was coming for us, and as it drew closer, my father tightened his grip on my wrist until it finally passed the row where we were hiding. And I watched the blurry, black silhouette of the monstrous policeman move forward without looking back at us. "It's not stupid," my father whispered, so softly it was almost without breath, in a hushed plea, only the wet sound as he mouthed the words. "It knows we're still here. Be quiet." He moved forward on all fours, and I followed. He turned left at the end of the row of cabinets towards the stairs, and I almost panicked at the thought of turning my back on the monster that was still click-clacking somewhere in that room. I couldn't tell if I was particularly stealthy. My breath was held most of the time, and my heart felt like it was pounding against my ribs. But we reached the stairs safely, and I paled when something warm and wet soaked my hands and knees. But my father didn't stop, and in fact, he ensured I stepped through the pulpy mess of one of our former party members without hesitation. The tangled blonde hair I saw made me think of William. But the jumble of broken bones and mangled flesh could easily have been Andrew. Or even both of them, pressed together like two corpses put through a trash compactor. We retreated, front feet first, on our bellies, through the hole in the barricade that blocked the stairs. The last thing I saw before my head ducked beneath the opening was a glowing light in the distance. To my horror, I realized the monster had picked up some kind of lantern to bathe us in its light. "Click-clack, please do not panic," it boomed. Its voice was a deeply distorted, robotic transmission. Even from a distance, I was certain it didn't come from a human mouth. Certainly not from the drooling, sagging mouth I'd glimpsed on its face. It was the kind of voice you'd use to herd civilians into a bunker or even to an execution line. I instinctively distrusted the speaker and whoever had created it in this world. "Visitors, do not be alarmed. Minimal risk of infection. Entropy parasites are not present at this location. Gooseneck contamination has been contained. Please present for police inspection. Vigilance is the price of safety. This is our last refuge. There is no other sanctuary." "Did it eat them?" I asked, staring at the rows of cages filled with desiccated remains. Some had been torn open at the base like wet bones. One had been pressed through unforgiving metal bars and brutally killed in the process, but most looked like they had starved. Approaching one, my father bent down, picked up a piece of paper, and held it up. It was a standard form with dozens of boxes, except they had been filled in with hurried handwriting and covered in greasy fingerprints. Arrest Report H387. Violation. Failure to present PROA ID to arresting officer. Noncompliance with police is a serious offense. Initial scan shows lack of nano-vaccine. Non-vaccinated movement is a serious offense. Personal effects indicate perpetrator stole from locals. Violation of integration protocol is a serious offense. Suspect details recorded below. Name, F*CKU. Citizen ID, what the F*CK are you talking about? Initial statement, what's wrong with you? Let me go. Note from arresting officer, I'm very cold. In the corner of the room was a strange, foul-smelling, moldy copper coffin wired to a strange humming machine, like the ones we'd found in the glowing green room. From its size, I guessed it belonged to the policeman chasing us, though I couldn't imagine why the floor was strewn with rusty, bent nails that would pierce anyone lying in it. Then, I remembered Andrew stabbing its arm to no effect, and I realized that whatever was hunting us clearly had a high pain threshold. We continued our descent, passing through what I considered the policeman's workshop and into a larger, laboratory-like structure and a hall plastered with faded propaganda posters. One showed a smiling policeman, identical to the one chasing us, towering above a menacing figure too far away to discern. Behind the policeman was the cartoonish, red-haired image of a woman clinging to his coat for safety. "Seen a gooseneck, find your nearest Reconnet officer," and smaller text below, "Reconnet officers are immune to plague-opy. Find one immediately if you believe a gooseneck is nearby. Do not touch infected individuals." The policeman in the poster was massive and clearly resembled the one haunting us, but his head was normally set, and he looked quite cheerful. His face was alert, intelligent, even noble. Nearby, another poster showed a similar-looking policeman towering over the London skyline, a stern, authoritative expression on his face. It read, "Even the weakest man can have the heart of a lion. Stand up against the plague, against the entropy parasite. Science can enhance the body, but this nation needs your spirit. Something worse than death lurks in London. Are you capable of stemming the tide of parasitic assault? Keep your country safe, keep your family safe. Inquire about reconstruction at your local police station." I shone my light on the final poster. It depicted a cocky soldier winking at a passing woman, smiling. Just below was another frame showing him in a doctor's office, the doctor vomiting as the soldier's skin slowly began to slough off his bones. Locals may look like us, they may speak our language, but they are not from our world. Adhere to transit protocols, keep your family safe, keep your country safe. Do not socialize with natives. I started when, a few seconds later, my father spoke. I turned to see him holding a piece of paper in his hand. He read aloud. Orders from headquarters regarding the handling of police recon officers. 2 support departments tell me that reconnet officers with no operational function are a nightmare to contain. So I guess we're not the first to deal with this. They say if we send him back, they'll be able to kill him. It seems minor with everything else going on. But with such an uncertain future, we cannot have a recon officer wandering around in eternal pain, dangerous to everyone, not to mention incredibly cruel. That man sacrificed everything to give us a second chance. The moment we have our next safe opportunity, we will send him back. If headquarters still exists, they can deal with it. If not, at least we won't have to worry about him revealing us or harming the locals. By the way, I saw you practicing in the mirror. Your voice is improving. One day, I'll arrange a visit to the surface. What the hell is that? I asked. God knows, he replied before taking my hand and leading me to a staircase in the corner of the laboratory. As we descended, we found ourselves on another level that closely resembled a subway station. It bore the sign, Outpost 18,997, but was covered in graffiti. Below was the inscription, Final stop, nowhere left to go. Gas masks littered the floor, and the tracks were choked with 1,000 bleached bones, with screaming skulls peering out from behind cracked and shattered visors. All of them reached towards the platform. Shining my light, I could only glimpse a broken train car some distance away. Like the other machines in this place, it bore Tesla coils and strange brass spheres that I imagined once crackled with electricity and power, but were now thickly rusted or covered in sickly verdigris. I almost gasped when a gust of wind blew through the tunnel and ruffled my hair. For a moment, I thought of abandoning all reason and running into it with open arms and joyful cries. But we were nowhere near the surface. And why were all the skeletons fleeing towards us? My dad asked, finding his voice for the first time since we reunited. What the hell is this place? Just a bunker, he sighed. Dad didn't know what he thought, anything but this. Dad started to think, he pointed towards the tunnel, that tunnel doesn't lead home at all, at least not our home. That's right, click, damn it, I hissed. Clack, Dad thought there would be a way out, my father said, his face crumpled, almost crying. Oh God, I'm so stupid, I thought I'd be safe, I looked into the darkness. There's no other choice. The tunnel ended at a wall, but the breeze continued to blow through. It smelled strange, a little like the dusty air of a construction site. My dad reached out to touch it, and we saw the entire wall ripple like water. If we weren't running for our lives, we might have even felt awe and wonder. Click-clack, here we go, I said, taking a deep breath. My dad turned to look over his shoulder towards the source of the sound, only to snatch his hand back from the illusory wall. It didn't come back alone. There was something on his fingertip. Something that looked a little like the specks you see in your eyes on a sunny day, or like the tiny worms that haunt the corners of your vision. It was the size of a leech's, and looked a little like a living creature made of a mixture of lubricant and the rainbows you see on oil. Before any of us had a chance to ask about it, it began to devour his hand. Damn it, damn it, damn it, he hissed. Get it off, get it off. My dad tried to shake it off like a snot rag, but it didn't respond to inertia or even gravity. The way it frothed and moved across his skin, it didn't even look like it could be touched, as if it wasn't made of the same substance as the rest of us. It crawled about halfway up his arm before he started screaming. Click-clack, the policeman now saw, trying to keep its footing on the pile of mist. It was coming, but then again. We had nowhere to go, so what was the rush? Get it off, my dad yelled, collapsing to his knees. He held up his arm, and I saw holes cleanly pierced through his flesh like Swiss cheese. By now, the worm had devoured his arm up to his shoulder. Its transparent, trembling body swelled with each passing second. Every second or two, it tensed, strained, and a geometrically perfect hole was pierced into my dad's flesh, cutting bone and muscle as if they were paper under a hole punch. Infection detected, the policeman boomed, and I turned to see it closer than ever. Biological host compromised, movement, containment protocols have failed. It reached down and grabbed my dad's skull as if it were an orange, and it lifted him off the ground with ease. Recon Police 27 preparing for unscheduled emergency transit. Click! The monster's head jerked towards me on its broken neck. When it spoke from a speaker hidden in its chest. Do not attempt to flee before additional police forces arrive. Doing so will only increase the severity of your sentence. Remain in place. Clack! The neck jerked back, and without further hesitation, the monster stepped into the rippling wall, carrying my screaming father. It turns out it wasn't uncommon for people to go missing in the London Underground maze. Andrew, William, and Kay weren't looked into, at least not by the government. Their families tried to hire private detectives, I understand, but mostly nothing seemed unusual from the outside. They had organized expeditions underground in dangerous places. They had had a few close calls before that I'd never heard about when first hiring them. And the police weren't surprised at all that it ended badly for them. I didn't even have to come up with many excuses. I told them about the drainage pipe, the one with the ladder, and said it had flooded while we were passing through. The other 3 were swept away by the water, while I, by chance, grabbed the ladder and held on tight. After that, no one asked any more questions. Well, except one person. He was a normal-looking policeman, and he showed up at my door 3 weeks after everything had settled down with a smile that made my stomach churn. He looked decent enough, I guess. I didn't want to think too much about anything down there, and after telling so many lies, a part of me began to believe them. Maybe we had almost drowned. Maybe I had spent 2 days stumbling around in a delirium, almost dying of pneumonia. It made much more sense. But this guy, he didn't look right. Not so much his face, but the way he looked at me, the way he smiled. He said he had a few more checks to do and walked into my house with a polite demeanor, but one that didn't really allow me to object. He just walked in, nodded, and talked incessantly about the weather and the recent pandemic and the delicious smell of food cooking in my neighbor's kitchen. Nothing was right. Nothing was right, at least not the briefcase in his right hand. It didn't look like something a policeman should carry. It was old, worn leather with a strange little lock made of greasy brass. When it opened with a click, he kept the inside facing away from me. But I glimpsed a few wires and even a glass tube. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Just a test," he said with a smile and a voice I couldn't place. "All sorts of things down there, I imagine. All sorts of strange germs and parasites. Just want to make sure you didn't bring any of them back with you. One day, I hope someone goes down and blocks all that nonsense off. That way, we'll never have to worry about people getting hurt again." His eyes stared intently at the mysterious briefcase, filled with tension. For a moment, I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, and he flinched. He tried to hide it, but I had the feeling if I reached out and touched him, he would scream. Only all of that changed when a small chime rang out from the buzzing machine he wouldn't let me see. Suddenly, the briefcase slammed shut, and he reached out to shake my hand. "Oh, wonderful," he exclaimed, and I could see the relief on his face came from deep within his soul. "No infection," he said, "completely healthy." "No parasites," I replied, "entropy or otherwise." He stood still as if I had just slapped him hard. That frighteningly forced joviality vanished, and he looked at me with so much sadness in his eyes. "Is anyone down there?" he asked. "No one alive," I replied. "We thought so too," he responded. "Nothing down there worth saving, I suppose." "No," I shook my head. "Then," he said, trying but failing to appear unaffected, "I suppose we're truly here for good now." And with that, he left, the strange little briefcase tucked under one arm. I was hired as a living exhibit in a billionaire's private collection. "You resemble her." The old man nodded towards the painting, one of many that adorned the hallways of the grand house. It showed a young woman being flayed from the hips down. Her skin stretched out behind her like a cloak as she carved a path through a desperate, impoverished crowd. She looked serene and content, basking in the admiration of the populace, even as they peeled her from her legs with serrated blades and scalpels. "It's bizarre," was all I could say. Mr. Brinshaw smiled like an amused father. I had expected him to be an obnoxious, rich prick after reading about his work, with his slicked-back straw-colored hair and teeth too large for his gums. But when I met him, I was surprised to find him quiet and refined, even a little affectionate. Somehow, he was even more frightening because of it. "The artist is very close to my heart," he said. "I was his benefactor, but it can be hard for people to get what they want, especially money. I thought I was saving him." He died before the millennium, twisted beyond recognition on some hospital bed, begging for more drugs. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. Don't be, he replied. He wrote some remarkable poetry, revolutionary poetry that might have ushered us into a new age of spiritualism, if he hadn't burned most of it. He also gave me this painting, and in doing so, he led me to you. You mean Jensen brought it to my attention? I asked. He was referring to the strange-looking assistant who had pleaded with me at the door 3 weeks prior. He was the one who brought your job application to me. I took the resemblance between you and the painting as a sign. I thought you hired me for my experience as a professional, I said. Oh, we've had all sorts of those here, he said. Educated and qualified people, but it's not always about degrees or even talent. Sometimes I simply like to give people a chance to get what they want. Like your artist, I asked. He got what he wanted. The old man smiled again, and this time it was no longer fatherly. I suppose that's up to you. We were required to wake at 5:00 a.m. and spend the day preparing. Costume fittings, rehearsals, more costume fittings, more rehearsals. Hours spent sitting still, standing still, posing, smiling, crying, moaning, roaring, growling. I was sensual, vulnerable, dignified, angry, intense, silent, cold, warm, hot. By the end of the first day, as the sun began to set on the coast of the private island, I was exhausted and ready to collapse. Only the performance hadn't even begun. I knew we weren't alone, if only because the other performers never kept quiet about catching a glimpse of Prince so-and-so or Baron this or that. Each night we would be put on display for whatever wealthy guests Mr. Brinshaw could fly in. But I had to shut it out. I just had to. I couldn't think about the princes and moguls, about the people with the power to change my life, to lift it from the dust or stomp it into nothing if the fancy took them. I couldn't even think about the people next to me. Lithe and tall and hauntingly beautiful, the other performers chattered incessantly and carried the day's strain with an easy grace. They were professionals, not like me, but instead like the people I had aspired to be in my youth. They were performance artists and dancers and models, human clay transformed into works of art that inspired and enlightened. There were photographs of them in galleries worth more than all the possessions of my lifetime. For the first piece, we were dressed in academic gowns. Only, instead of caps, we wore old military helmets. They were sharp, spiked things that I'm sure commented on violence or education or something else. I couldn't say for sure because the artist who staged it wouldn't speak to me, wouldn't even look at me. I listened but didn't speak for 12 hours until the final moment came, and we were herded onto a stage where I was asked to stand in a corner and look pathetic. There were 13 of us, positioned at various points around a central dais. A young woman, easily 6 feet tall with the physique of a Victorian ghost, was then led to her place at the focal point of the piece. She tried not to smile as she ascended the steps, but her eyes flickered to mine for the briefest moment, and I felt her smug superiority overwhelm me. I started to tremble, my face flushing with sweat and shame. But before I had time to compose myself, the room suddenly erupted into frantic commotion, and all the black-clad assistants, choreographers, and costume designers fled to the far corners of the room where they disappeared behind secret doors. Only the artist remained, and he made his final adjustments before the guests arrived. "Catherine," he said, and God, if I hadn't heard that exact pronunciation of my name 1,000 times before. "My dear Catherine, could you crouch down a little, just a little?" I bent my knees ever so slightly, receiving a full view of the back of a young man. I was effectively hidden behind him. "Wonderful," the artist said and clapped his hands, and then the guests streamed in. I stepped down from the dais, yellow paint flaking from my armpits and groin. It was the 3rd week, the 21st performance. Each day we spent 6 long hours posing or performing as if engaged in a ritual. No 2 performances were alike, and each day brought strange new instructions. Today's task was to remain completely motionless. I was exhausted, trembling, and drained from the sheer physical effort of holding a pose for an absurdly long time. Ilana glided past me, a head taller than I was, not even looking down as she hurried towards the admiring artist. The other dancers broke from their conversations and spilled out to greet her. And a timid-looking man I knew to be a guest hovered awkwardly, waiting to be introduced to her. His films dominated the box office every year, but he sat nervously, anxious as a pudgy teenager at Comic-Con. She was painted silver, Only on her, it looked like platinum. The rest of us were like poorly cast bronze statues in comparison. This was our first nude performance, and I didn't feel like staying with all the others, who seemed so comfortable in their own skin, so I hurried off stage and headed for one of the corner exits. "Oh, Alana," I turned to catch Mr. Brinshaw, escorted by the lanky Jensen. He shuffled over to the precious metal maiden and took one of her hands in his. His eyes looked at her with pure admiration, as if she were his favorite daughter and mistress combined. Whatever he said to her, I couldn't quite hear, but it looked like a shared secret between two knowing souls. It broke my heart to see him talk to her like that. How childish and foolish of me. I knew it even then, but it still hurt like hell. I looked down at my feet and saw the paint flaking, and I felt so annoyed that it did that to me, but no one else. I was about to rush back to the changing room, only for my attention to be drawn back to Mr. Brinshaw. He was talking and laughing, and he had scanned the crowd in a way that I mistakenly thought was him turning towards me. Only his eyes didn't linger, not even for a second. He simply didn't see me. "Don't look for Prince Charming, that's Jensen." He smiled awkwardly as he sat beside me on the steps where I was smoking. We were behind one of the many kitchens that opened onto a gravel courtyard. Big houses, really big houses, I know they often have little openings like this. It lets natural light fill the deep rooms in the center of the building. Many models wanted to meet guests outside the performance. Mr. Brinshaw finally gave in. "He's added you to Alana?" I asked. Jensen scoffed. I thought he was trying to be sympathetic, but it didn't sound like it. "Didn't realize I'd go this far to be hidden in the back," I added. "It's been 3 weeks, and since the first time, I've been out of sight." "She's doing her best," he said with a clumsy shrug. "Am I that bad at standing out?" He laughed. "It's a strange job," he replied. "Mr. Brinshaw likes art, he always has, but he's fickle. He won't keep you at the center every time. I'm sure there will be some opportunities to be up there." "I'm not some teenage girl who needs approval," I told him. "Why don't you go up there and show off to Jensen's CEO if it's so easy?" "Oh God, no," he laughed. "I couldn't go up there and do what you girls do. There isn't a single adult hairline up there." I don't know if he realized it, but he rubbed his hand over his head as he spoke. "As for you," he said, "one of the guests left this for you." He handed me a small business card. My name was written on one side in a florid cursive script. "You are a formidable force," it read. "Shine brightly." "Mr. Brinshaw," I asked. "That's not his handwriting," he replied. "But someone saw you up there and liked you. I know you feel a bit out of your depth, but you're not completely outmatched. We hired you for a reason, just keep going." That night I couldn't sleep, so I decided to take my restlessness and channel it a bit with a walk around the house. Most of it was open to us, and in one of our first meetings, Mr. Brinshaw had encouraged us to wander the halls and galleries so we could be inspired by his private collection. Most of it was rather pedestrian. Obscure blocks of color and black and white photographs of naked women, alongside ugly caricatures and unsubtle declarations of all sorts of isms. Any of the pieces would be worth millions to the right person. But none of them spoke to me, or at least most didn't. Certainly, a lot of it was stereotypical, exactly the kind of thing you'd expect to find hanging on the wall of someone with too much money. But occasionally, I would find myself stopping at a painting with a cheap frame, hanging precariously above a bathroom door or hidden in one of the endless corridors, and it would seize my attention. I saw oceans of blue with bone-colored foam, skies a writhing pattern of eye-aching fractals. Another showed a riot of gouged eyes and broken bones. Beside it was a painting of poisoned men collapsing at their tables as their skin peeled from their bodies and they clutched at purple faces. One of the most beautiful showed an endless field of ice, broken only by a single, dark smear of blood. I walked until just after midnight, heading towards these Baroque paintings that were clearly and intentionally downplayed. Slowly, I realized that they formed a kind of secret exhibit, one threaded throughout all the others. The paintings varied in their content, but all possessed a singular aesthetic sensibility that I knew must belong to the collector. If he had bought the other paintings out of some arrogant need to impress, he had at least bought these out of a genuine affinity. He liked them, and I liked them too. My favorite was an image of puckered, lipstick-red lips open, pressed tightly to the hole of a cigar cutter. The tip of the woman's tongue was forced into the hole, and the faint blade was visible at the corner of the aperture. It wasn't bleeding yet, but you could see how close it was to breaking the thin skin. God, the flow of colors was incredible, capturing the strange mauve complexion of the veins streaking the underside of her tongue with an almost photographic realism. You could actually feel the pressure as a tangible thrill. Do you know who painted these? I turned to see Alana looking anxious, with undare bags. She didn't look grand outside the fake dresses, nor did she seem unpleasant. She looked young, and I softened my expression and tone to swallow a bit of that wicked envy I felt. No, I replied. Do you? She shook her head. They're in my dreams, she said, chuckling nervously. I'm having trouble sleeping. Maybe it's just the stress of always being at the center of it all. I don't mind the attention, she replied. I think it's this place. Maybe you've done a lot of exploring. Many doors are locked, but one of them. Would you mind checking something out for me? She relaxed a bit and reached out to take my hand before hurrying with me following behind. She reminded me of a small child, relieved to find they weren't lost and alone. And I felt a little apprehensive as her steps slowed, and we reached a small door set at the end of a very long cul-de-sac. Listen, she whispered before stealthily slipping in and holding her breath. She gestured for me to do the same, and I did. I pressed my chest against the nearby wall and leaned out to let my ear hover over the wooden panels. Someone's in there, she said silently. I strained to hear past the rush of blood in my ears. For a few brief seconds, the world narrowed to a delicate point as I focused all my attention on that door. Silent, very silent. I couldn't be sure it was even there. I heard a rustle, or perhaps a scratch, or maybe even a footstep. It was hauntingly silent. I was aware that I might be hearing something as subtle as the shifting of bedsheets or the turning of a body as it silently rotated on one foot. What about me? I wondered. What about my clumsy feet? Or the creak of bones or strained muscles? Could they hear me? I looked back the way we had come. We were deep in the spider's lair, so to speak, and I was about to pull away from the wall and begin to walk slowly back. Ilana did the same, only we both stopped as a white business card slid out from under the door. Ilana was frozen by the sight, her eyes wide and her skin so pale she looked like a porcelain doll. I realized I would have to be the one to pick up the card. A small thing to do, I told myself, but the hairs on my arm still stood on end as my hand approached the gap at the bottom of the door. I felt a gust of wind blow through, only it was hot and damp like someone's breath. It smelled of rotten meat and perfume. As soon as I had the business card in my hand, I stood up and ran. Your friend is not well, it read, but I am glad you enjoy my paintings. I don't like any of his paintings, Ilana said, giggling and dazed with fear. Both of us had settled on one of the many winding staircases throughout the house. I don't know why this person thinks I do. I didn't have the heart to tell her that I recognized the handwriting. But then again, she had automatically assumed I was the friend. And why not? Didn't everyone love her? Didn't everyone focus all their attention on her? Whoever it is, I said, they don't like you bringing me along. Maybe next time you should go alone. She nodded in agreement. Everyone was talking the next day except me. Ilana had been taken away in a sudden commotion around 5:00 a.m. Everyone asked if I had seen her, but I always replied in the negative. My hand brushed the business card in my pocket with each query. There had been a struggle, some people said. Something terrible had happened in the library near Mr. Brinshaw's bedroom. At least some of the other performers even mentioned screams, or that they had extracted information from one of the staff members. Whatever had happened, it had taken place in some distant corner of the mansion, and it led to an orange rescue helicopter flying to the private island, where Ilana was lifted away with her face covered in bandages. With one fewer performer, everyone's attention soon returned to the task at hand. The artist of the day was almost in tears as she ordered us around and screamed at the costume seamstresses to do a week's worth of work in an afternoon. Everything was frantic, and soon the mystery settled, and we were all being rushed onto the stage. We were ballerinas this time, each slashed with fake blood and covered in prosthetic makeup that oddly distorted our faces. It was suffocating and awkward, and it took all my energy to focus on the strange procession we formed around the stage. A parade of famous guests Mr. Brinshaw had pursued were paraded before us, and I was sure I recognized one or two faces. They looked approving. For the first time since arriving, I was clearly visible. I wasn't at the center, of course, but at least I wasn't intentionally hidden. I held my figure, kept my position, and followed the prescribed choreography. Occasionally, I would transition from one pose to another or enact some vague medical procedure. These displays were painful, slow, and boring, but I suppose that was the point. A living painting, as Jensen had described it, although it wasn't quite that. The truth was, we were live. It was part of the brushstrokes that made up the complete picture. We were there, uncomfortable and tired and exhausted, with needles and pins in our arms and legs. That was what truly mattered. I was a living ornament. When it ended, I stayed once. This time, no guests were allowed, although the performers did drink a little. I managed to talk to a few people and make some small friends here and there. One of them, a young man, was actually quite charming and clearly somewhat interested in me. By the time we staggered out and returned to our rooms, I was drunk and happy, and all thoughts of Alana were long forgotten. At least until I got to my bed and pulled back the covers to reveal a blood-soaked cigar cutter. Beside it lay a tiny pink cone of flesh, and I realized with great horror that it was someone's fingertip. The person who had left it had included a note. "You look beautiful tonight," it read. "Rivals beware." We were naked and cold. This meant we shivered. Our skin was pale and covered in goosebumps. Even our breath was icy. With the money we were being paid, no one dared to complain. But there was something about this display that felt particularly dehumanizing. I believe it was a comment on homelessness. Perhaps the artist had mentioned that the room had to be conditioned to the exact temperature of a New York December night. I thought that was funny because the guests were dressed in furs and held hot drinks. If they really wanted to learn about suffering, I thought they shouldn't do it by watching others. Nevertheless, I kept those thoughts to myself. We all did. Even after the first performer collapsed, I was surprised to see a team of paramedics rush out from behind some curtains and begin to attend to him without fanfare. I wanted to turn my head and look. I knew a few others did too, but neither the guests nor the staff reacted. To my right, one of the other performers began to tremble. I could see him struggling to keep his chattering teeth the loudest sound in that room, but the audience had become captivated by our struggles. The lazy procession of fur-clad women and old men with pipes slowed as if in awe, and as one, they turned to look at us. All faces turned towards the trembling young man whose skin was turning blue. Finally, he gave up. A cry of frustration escaped him, and he began to walk, only for his body to give out. He collapsed too, his head hitting the hard edge of the stage with a terrifying closeness as he fell. In my mind, I knew that meant there were 10 of us left, and I swore the room was getting colder. A few others made minor adjustments, probably thinking the same thing I was. This was an exhibit on endurance or pain or something similar. They just hadn't told us. Nevertheless, it was all part of the performance. I couldn't understand why anyone would conceive of this, but I found myself wondering what it meant to be the last one standing, to be the only one up there, standing and displaying everything. Perhaps not to be admired, not by everyone certainly, but at least to be acknowledged, to be seen. I like to think we all realized this at the same time. It would be another 2 hours before anyone else fell. I'd bet it was due to a sudden surge of determination, inspired by the first two. I knew competition worked wonders for my stamina, and it continued to do so, even as another, then 2, and then 3 more collapsed or ran off crying, unable to bear another second of the freezing cold. That left 6. I was one of them. The audience seemed to shift members without anyone moving, or perhaps the temperature was starting to mess with my mind. Now snot was running from my nose, and sometimes I had to close my eyes to keep the cold from burning my irises. Sometimes one of the performers had to adjust, wiping snot or preventing a limb from giving out entirely. A few even rubbed their arms and chests. After all, no one had spelled out any games or rules. We just decided it was up to us to last as long as possible, and the unspoken rule seemed to be that you only gave up if you left. But I didn't want to compromise the display. Unlike them, I remained completely motionless, until the pain became unbearable and I felt the edges of my vision begin to fade. I was close to giving up when I felt a blast of hot air. It was so deliriously joyous that I thought it was the onset of hypothermia, but that didn't explain the smell. God, it was awful. A stomach-churning mix of rotting meat and fruit that made me think of buzzing flies and bloated corpses on the road. But it was warm. It was so warm that I felt sensation return to my arms, and then my hands and legs, until even my toes and fingers tingled with heat. An awkward glance at the others showed them shivering, and I watched as another collapsed in a puddle of tears and cried for help. But I was warm, even comfortable. The fewer of us there were, the more I felt eyes on me. They were impressed. I could tell. The billionaires and tycoons who ruled the world, and there they were, watching what I was made of. Far from what I had first imagined, this wasn't a display of youthful fragility. They had come here to see some raw grit, and I knew I had it in me to be the last one up there. Of course, it eventually came down to me, and me alone. The last one collapsed with a loud thud from behind, and I couldn't stop the smile that curled on my face. And I wasn't done yet. This was supposed to be a 6-hour display, and I knew there was another hour to go. So why was the audience looking at me as if I was about to take a bow? A few of them were starting to look a bit worse for wear. I could see it even from the stage. Their furs could only do so much for so long. But I was basking in the warmth, in the hot, fetid gusts of wind blowing down from above like the breath of a giant. Finally, the artist stepped out and announced the display was over. For the first time, the audience applauded one of our performances, and I knew for certain it wasn't for anyone but me. You know what happened to Alana, don't you? It was a young man talking to me, one of the performers. I'm sure he had told me his name early on. We had probably even flirted. But I was lost in thought when he found me, and I could only say he looked familiar. No, I shook my head and turned back to the painting. It showed a naked adolescent boy floating in a void. His mouth was stretched so wide that the skin was beginning to tear, his head thrown back like a hungry nestling. From above, molten gold poured into his mouth, overflowing his lips and streaming over his face and shoulders in glittering rivulets. There was something about the brushstrokes that made the gold look incredibly three-dimensional, as if you could reach out and pinch off a stream with your fingertips. "I don't believe you," he replied. "Why not?" "I don't know," he said. "I think you know something I don't. You haven't fit in since day one. I had a friend look you up, and the last time you did any professional work was 5 or 8 years ago. What since then? Day jobs, retail. It's hard for a dancer to be seen," I said. "Good times for you now, but it won't last. How many people do you know who graduated from contemporary dance school and went on to have long, successful, beautiful careers? It's hard, and it only gets harder." "But you're here," he replied, "and they're not. There's a bad smell. Since that night when they tried to freeze us to death, I've thought that all of this feels wrong. I wouldn't be surprised if it was one big performance and you're a part of it." "So what do you want me to say?" "I want to know the truth," he said. "I want to know why someone like you is up there, taking center stage after a string of fabrications just to keep us curious, make us a little more uneasy. Why don't you see for yourself?" I said and gestured for him to follow me, leading him silently to the door at the end of the long hallway. Lately, that door had had a strange habit of always being closed, but I didn't think much of it. I had no precise idea what I was going to do, but he seemed very pleased with himself and his little theory. And my agreeing to show him something confirmed all his petty jealousies. When I stopped and told him to open the door, I think he suspected something. Although it was probably difficult for him to say anything because even I didn't understand my own actions. "What's in there?" he asked. "I think it's someone that all of this is really for," I replied. He took that as confirmation of some idea he had been pondering for a while, and all hesitation left his face. He opened the door and stepped in, ready to demand some answers. I stayed behind, my mouth agape at what lay in the room. For the young man, it clearly took a few moments before the signals his eyes received actually registered somewhere in that thick head of his. I couldn't blame him, I suppose. It made too little sense. He shouldn't have been able to walk into it at all. It was a featureless void of distant blue and cosmic light. It felt immensely vast, but also somehow intimate, even suffocating. I found myself stepping back, allowing the door to frame the open space, and the young man stood in the center with his feet placed in nothingness. "What the hell?" With a spine-snapping crack, his head flew back and he began to struggle. His body lifted gently, leaving his feet dangling freely, and he kicked frantically in an attempt to find the floor. His eyes were blinking wildly from side to side, and I knew he was looking for me, hoping I would come to his rescue. But I was paralyzed by horror and awe and exquisite anticipation. He screamed as gold poured down, striking his face and eyes in a hot, molten mess. Up close, I realized this wasn't paint, but real molten metal. And God, it was beautiful. He thrashed and howled in agony as the very flesh of his face and torso cooked in the cocoon of boiling metal, only for his limbs to stiffen and his body to fall silent. He wasn't dead. I could see that from the way he kept trying to turn and look at me, as if something had seized him in a giant hand. And with that, his mouth was pulled open by an invisible force, so strong that I heard his jaw dislocate with a sickening pop. He struggled a little more until finally his entire body went slack. He hung there, suspended in nothingness, as the gold continued to pour down in a gruesome waterfall. It was a perfect recreation of the painting. Even the doorway had taken on a strange golden quality, and I realized it was a perfect replica of the painting's frame. I couldn't tell if it had always been that way or had somehow transformed before my eyes, but I had no doubt that what I was seeing was real, even as the doorway seemed to shrink until it was no more than a foot across. Not quite knowing why, I reached out, and as if perspective curved in on itself, my finger touched the canvas. The door was gone, and now there was only the painting. The boy still hung there, slowly rotating. As I withdrew my hand, I noticed a streak of gold running down it. I chuckled, I licked it, and savored the chemical taste. When I looked back, the scene had frozen, and I was facing a perfect replica of the original painting. You know what happened to Alana, don't you? It was a young man talking to me, one of the performers. I'm sure he had told me his name early on. We had probably even flirted, but I was completely absorbed by the painting in front of me. Blinking away the urge to giggle or run, I turned back to him. He looked strangely familiar, didn't he? I shook my head, unable to keep a sarcastic smile from reaching my lips. I opened the wardrobe door and was surprised to see a young woman staring at me, her eyes wide, and she retreated into the corner like a wounded animal. I recognized her immediately as one of the performers. "Oh dear," I cried, "what are you doing in there?" "Be quiet," she hissed. "I thought the others had left." "Don't be silly," I grumbled. "Don't we have a performance today?" The woman looked at me as if I were insane, her anxiety temporarily overridden by confusion. "Do you know what's out there?" she asked. "What's going on?" "A house," I chuckled. "A few paintings." "You looked at the paintings," she cried. "No, no, 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 I won't let that happen to me. You should." I said, "Didn't you come here to be part of something special?" She gave me that look again, as if I were a lunatic, but before she could utter any more venom, something moved in the wardrobe behind her. "What's that?" she shrieked, her head darting from side to side. It moved again, and I realized it was the wall behind her. I decided to try and calm her, but as I reached out, my hand hit something cold and hard like a sheet of glass. Tongue, my fingers fumbled over the surface in confusion while the woman frantically clawed at the small space, searching for whatever had moved. When the wall shifted again, she finally realized what was happening. "Let me out," she screamed and tried to push me aside, but like me, her hands couldn't pass through that invisible wall. "What the?" she stammered. "What the hell?" Her eyes flickered to mine with burning hatred. You, she shrieked. "It's been you all along, I knew it, you never." Her words were cut off as the wall behind her touched her back. All accusations fell away as she was pressed against the glass, and pressure began to build. Desperately, her hands fumbled at the invisible wall, and I noticed that her fingertips were protruding around the edges. I touched it and felt the gap, no more than a millimeter wide. "I don't think you'll fit through there," I said, only for the wall behind her to come closer once more. This time, it was followed by one or two cracking sounds, and the girl's eyes widened. She continued to scream, but another push from the wall behind, and all sound stopped. Not because she was dead, but simply because she couldn't move her ribs and diaphragm enough to draw air in. What little remained in her lungs was used to whisper a silent plea. "Help." "I am helping," I said. The wall was relentless, and I stepped back as it pushed through her like a hydraulic press. The colors pressed onto that invisible surface began to bloom as her body underwent what one might call a postmodern deconstruction. Pinks and purples, yellows and browns and reds. It made me think of pre-mixed paint. I stepped back and began to appreciate the way the door framed the painting, the space it defined. And for the first time, I saw the missing image. But then she began to leak through the gaps at the sides. Oh, it was a joy, like Play-Doh squeezed through a toy. She flowed out from all four edges of the frame and out towards me in an undulating wave of ever-thinning material. It hit the floor and began to fold in on itself, and I stepped back to let it pile up. "Much better," I said. "A much more interesting piece." From my feet, I heard a small cry and saw a piece of her looking up at me. Poor thing, she was still so frightened, she was still trying to move. Art can be transformative, I said, bending down to caress her. From above, a hot gust of wind blew over me, heavy with the stench of rotting flesh and meat. I could tell he agreed. There were many paintings on my room walls, all of them so familiar. The people up there, floating around, that as if they were even people anymore. Some of those pictures showed pieces of human beings or their insides. I admired the collection. It wasn't Mr. Brinshaw's, it was mine. I had a business card that said so. It was a shame there were so few performers left. I would have appreciated the chance to show them all off. One of the paintings was sweating. I took a cloth and wiped it, carefully trying to avoid damaging the precious canvas. It quickly became one of my favorites. I leaned forward and blew on it, giggling as its hair stood on end. "You're beautiful," I whispered. It groaned. I stepped back and looked at the other pieces. I thought there would be another performance soon, and I decided to go see if anyone ever came to pick me up. At this stage, they really couldn't afford to forget. The whole thing was resting on my shoulders. "Is anyone there?" I called, poking my head out the door, but no one answered. I continued searching and shouting, but the entire place was deserted. No staff, no butler or chef or maid or assistant or secretary or makeup artist or anyone. On a whim, I headed towards Mr. Brinshaw's door, thinking he would be able to sort all of this out. And if he was willing, I'm sure he would want to see my private collection. I was actually quite eager to show it off. I found him in his bedroom. It was a beautiful four-poster frame made of magnificent solid oak. The colors were so rich it looked almost opalescent. His companions were also very attractive. No one could say Mr. Brinshaw had bad taste. I only wished I hadn't stepped on him when I first entered the room. But the lights were off, and he was everywhere. The women were also in a bit of a bad state. Nevertheless, the room was full of giggling and cooing, and I just had to accept that Mr. Brinshaw was busy at the moment. I left and went to find Jensen. He was hanging in the foyer. His wrists were clearly cut with a letter opener that lay on the floor. He had written a note kept in his pocket, and I took it, knowing it was written for me. It was quite difficult to read with the bloody fingerprints and messy handwriting, but I managed to decipher some. In our wildest dreams, we expected this to happen. I won't lie to you and say we had the best intentions. But never like this, Catherine. You must be the last one left by now, and surely you're wondering what all of this is about. The summoning. I threw the note aside with a frown. "Me," I grumbled. "This was always about me." I gave Jensen a small playful shove, which made him sway. "You silly goose," I said before walking away. I was at the door when the rope snapped, and his body hit the marble floor with a bone-crushing thud. "I like you." The business card floated down from the darkness above and landed in my hair. It was always dark up there lately, as if it followed me from room to room, though I didn't move much anymore. It had been a good few weeks since the last performance. "I like you too," I said. "I see you." The business card landed in my lap. The words sent a vague, warm sensation rising in my stomach, and I reached out and held it close to my chest. "Thank you. I've enjoyed my time here." "Me too." "They're coming. Oh, just let them," I said. "They were always going to come. I have to go, but we need the last painting." A part of me wanted to cry, but I also knew this had been coming. Later, I wouldn't be seen by anyone the way he had seen me. "I know," I said. "You'll always be the best of all of them." A knife fell from the darkness above and landed beside me, blade first. It was embedded in the wooden floor, and the handle vibrated from side to side. Without thinking, I grabbed it and looked down at my feet. In the distance, I could hear a helicopter. I started to cut. I refused to go into detail for them. It was a ridiculous request to tell them what had happened, and it didn't matter how many angry people asked. Perhaps if they had appreciated the exhibit, but I could tell they were disgusted by the collection. I had inspired an unparalleled creativity in him, and he had run rampant, making and twisting and reshaping. And some of the things they found sobbing in that house were truly beautiful. A few even slipped into the sea. But I hadn't told them they had led me into this place, and he was gone. Oh well. Sometimes I felt that breath on my shoulder. He kept an eye on me when he could, I'm sure of it. One of the others here, a poor old man with no hair who always talked to himself. He asked what had happened, and so I told him that I had shone like a beacon, wanting to be seen and admired, and something had taken up the call. I told him that if he wanted to be seen badly enough and broadcast his thoughts far and wide enough, he too could be seen. That's when the space above me darkened, and he looked up, and that's when the screaming started. Now they don't let me out of my room, but the staff always gives me what I want: a laptop, a wee password, cigarettes, even some art supplies. They must think I'm dangerous and don't want to upset me. How silly to think that. It wasn't me who blinded that old man. He did it to himself. But I think he should know, and so should you. If you want to be seen, and I mean you want it really badly, you can really get his attention. Don't disturb the congregation of rats during worship. Why are you looking at my girlfriend? I'm fixing the sink, I replied. This guy seemed familiar, which worried me. He twitched and constantly scratched his thin arms. His eyes darted to every corner of the room. I tried to maintain a neutral demeanor, my head stuck under the kitchen cabinet. The sooner I fixed their problem, the sooner I'd be out of here. I hear about guys like you. You have keys to everyone's rooms and like to sneak in and install cameras in toilets and showers. I saw a picture of a hidden camera and a screw. I'm not stupid. I know what you guys do. Could you get me a drink, honey? Something from the vending machine, please? This baby is making me terribly tired. That was the guy's girlfriend talking. She had been slumped on the sofa the whole time I was there. She looked mostly sad, but also a little scared. She must have known her guy well, because I could see his mind working overtime after she spoke. He was torn between wanting to yell at me and taking care of his pregnant girlfriend. The whole time, I just sat under the sink, twisting off pipes and pulling black, rotten sludge into the bucket below. It was hard to concentrate, but I knew things could escalate quickly. A few long seconds passed before the door slammed shut. Sorry about him, the girl said, groaning as she sat up straight. Can you fix it before he gets back? I plunged my finger deep into the final clog and began to pull it out. I thought this was the end. Damn it. Something sharp had pierced through my rubber glove and into the soft flesh of my thumb as I tried to scrape out the clog. I yanked my hand out of the pipe and immediately tore off the glove, squeezing the flesh until a tiny bead of red blood appeared on my skin. Are you okay? She asked. There's something sharp in the pipe, I said before sucking the blood clean. With my good hand, I grabbed the pipe wrench and used it to pull out the last clump of food and hair. It plopped into the bucket with the rest of the clog. A glittering silver shape gleamed amidst the grime. Do you have kids? I asked, pulling out the strange object. It was an old paperclip, or perhaps a hairpin, bent and twisted into an odd shape, like interlocking circles, almost a broken keychain. This is my first, she said, patting her belly. I found this down there, I said, holding it up, but she just shrugged. I didn't put it down there, she replied. But if you're done, I'll clean up and leave before Jason gets back. He's not well. I nodded, slipped the strange item into my pocket, and began to pack up my tools. Everyone hated the basement. Most residents didn't even use it, but it was always full of old junk. A few lingering families were the main culprits. They usually arrived with a pile of old belongings and only accumulated more over time. Looking around, I saw more than a few jars down there, and I knew from experience not all of them were empty. People kept everything, sometimes for no real reason. In the back, Mrs. Harpist was calling from the stairs, her plump body blocking most of the light. Taking a deep breath, I turned on my flashlight and began to venture deeper into the piles of wet cardboard boxes, mail hooks, and broken furniture stacked high to the ceiling. I saw it, Mr. Thomas. I swear it, I saw it down there. I'm sure you did, I called back. I wasn't getting paid to reiterate. I saw it down there, the filthy, hairy thing, so big, and it was chewing on my old clothes. Buried deep in the back near the old boiler was a stack of damp cardboard boxes with "Property of a Harpist" scrawled on them. The bottom box had a hole chewed through one corner, and a dozen small, raisin-like droppings were scattered near the entrance. Here it is, I called out. You were right, Mrs. Harpist. I'll make sure to set some traps this afternoon. She shouted a few replies, but my attention was drawn elsewhere when I heard a scratching sound from a cluster of upturned boxes further ahead in the darkness. Down there, in the dark, daylight seemed very far away, and I felt an urge to be anywhere else. Hurrying up the stairs to give Mrs. H some comfort. That basement was a labyrinth of shadows, and I couldn't help but imagine what might be lurking just out of sight. Of course, deep down, I knew what was out there. What else could it be but a persistent scratching? I gripped my flashlight tightly and continued, turning a corner just in time to see a black, hairy form squeeze itself through a tiny gap in the wall. "Damn it," I groaned. I shuffled closer to the gap, which had been gnawed through Victorian brickwork. Something had been scratched into the floor, worn away over and over again with what seemed like thousands of iterations. It lay directly in front of the hole like a kind of signpost, no bigger than the palm of my hand, and its shape was strangely familiar. Intrigued, I took the thin piece of metal from my pocket and held it up, looking at the uncanny resemblance it bore to the image on the floor. 6 or 7 interlocking circles, tightly bound like a loop of string. The two shapes were identical replicas, only rendered by different means. I told myself it must have been kids, a random act of vandalism. But as I shone my light into that hole, a pair of beady red eyes flashed back at me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been watching me, assessing its work. It explicitly states many restrictions on using poison near parks like this. Oh, look at this. I leaned forward and pulled the toddler-sized bed away from the wall, revealing thousands of tiny black droppings in the space behind. "Tell me," I said, "this is okay. Listen," he held up his hand, "you don't have to do this, I support you." "No," I said firmly. "See, this is where the little girl keeps her toys." I patted the lid of a small toy chest before grabbing both sides and pulling it out. The wooden floorboard running along the floor had been completely gnawed through until there was a foot-wide hole. "There are real rats coming out of that damn wall. Help me, please. Why can't we do something about this?" Al replied, "You're new here. I just can't approve any purchase requests you've made recently. This is government housing, for God's sake. What if one of these kids is allergic to what you spray? Do you know how many bureaucratic hoops we have to jump through to fix something like this? So we just let this continue." "It's all part of a better Britain, isn't it? Don't be like that," he cried. "I'm not saying you're on your own, far from it. I'm sure you do some things online, right? Do you Google when you need to fix something? Yeah. So why should your property wear and tear working for the government? Coffee makers, ergonomic chairs, laptops, tablets. Hell, some guy in Southampton has an emotional support ferret in his cubicle. We just have to be creative. Some orders will slip through the government machine. Poison isn't one of them. I'll see what I can do and get back to you. Just show me the list of what you need." "Remember," he added, nudging a pile of damp, moldy clothes with one of his brown leather shoes, "they're not helping themselves here, are they?" Did you catch it yet? We both turned to see a little girl looking at us from behind the bedroom door, her fingers nervously clutching the doorframe. "It's under the bed," she whispered. "I'll leave this to you, Chris," Al said before giving me a fake salute. He smiled broadly at the little girl as he squeezed past and hurried away. "Just get me that list," he called out before the front door closed. "I found where it got in," I told the little girl, "and I'll fix it so it can't get through anymore." "Its whispering is scary," she replied, her shy eyes fixed on the floor. "Well, very soon that won't be a problem. It lives under there," she pointed to the floor. "It tells me, do you think it will be angry if it can't come through anymore?" "No," I lied, "and even if it is, I won't let it come back and do anything bad." "It says it will find me anyway," she replied, her eyes flicking up to the hole behind me. Something in there must have held her gaze, something that seemed to seize her and keep her staring with an almost dreamy expression. I suddenly became aware of that small gap in the wall, feeling its presence at my back as if it were a throbbing black hole. At first I didn't feel afraid of it, but now the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a chill ran down my spine. I turned on my flashlight and turned to see 2 red eyes gleam back at me from the darkness. They lingered for no more than a second before retreating into the shadows. Their disappearance was accompanied by a short, sharp clicking sound. "It doesn't like you," the little girl chirped in a sing-song voice before suddenly bursting into laughter and running away. I knelt down and began to nail a wooden board over the hole with anxious urgency. The old man was furious, purple-faced, and spitting everywhere. He roared angrily towards the neighbor's door, unaware that she wasn't even home. "That damn cat keeps leaving dead mice in my house," he cried. "She's not allowed to keep animals here, I told her. I told her again and again, and this is exactly why. It's unsanitary, it's disgusting. He didn't seem to notice my discomfort as I stood there awkwardly. Well, Mr. James, I said, whatever's going on, I'll make sure it stops right here, right now. Does that sound reasonable? I made sure to catch his eye and hold it as I asked the question. He paused his yelling for a few seconds, and when he replied, his voice was a little calmer. Right now? He asked. Not in 3 weeks or 6 months, or in some goddamn distant future when the council finally decides to make repairs. Right now, I said. I have the tools, I have the materials. It won't be pretty, but I'll make sure it holds. I won't leave until you're satisfied with it. He chewed the air for a few moments as he considered this. All right, it's in here. He led me into his small, cramped living room, the bedroom visible through an open doorway. The sight inside was not pretty, but it was the empty room he pointed me to, and I was grateful not to have to kick his old underwear around while looking for mice. However, his empty room was so full of old junk that he had to use his shoulder to push the door open. There was a bed somewhere in there, but you'd be hard-pressed to find it under the piles of books, photos, documents, and bags of old clothes from a lifetime. I had to squeeze in, step by step, careful where I placed my feet so as not to stumble. No need to stand there, I said as he hovered in the doorway. I'll call you when I'm done. If there's anything you're not happy with, I'll make sure to fix it for you. All right, he grumbled. Fine, I'll be out there on my chair. I returned to work and began to carve a path through the mountain of clutter. I happened to know that the neighbor actually had a cat, but I couldn't bring myself to report her. Not when I thought the building could use another 30 cats just to keep the rat population down. I suspected it was her doing. I told myself as I wandered around the windowless room. No attic access, no air conditioning. How did the cat get in here? I wondered. I thought there must be a vent somewhere, so I started kicking old clothes aside until I found it hidden at the back of the room. Big enough for rats, I mumbled when I saw it. Nothing else. A closer look showed the vent had been pushed out of its screws, God knows how, and it popped open with a gentle tug from my finger. The foul stench emanating from that hole was haunting, and I took a deep breath before placing my face close to it. I almost screamed when I saw something straight out of a nightmare looking back. Wretched and animalistic. Its expression was twisted into a desperate, agonizing shriek. Oh no, I hissed as my eyes took in more of the sight. This thing was clearly dead. Its skull barely fit into the hole, and all sorts of bones must have been broken for it to be forced down there. It looked somewhat monkey-like, but its teeth were too sharp and its face too pointed. Somehow, my curiosity built enough to overcome the initial terror, and I cautiously reached in to pull the monstrosity out. It came out with a disgusting sucking sound, its fur matted and dripping thick blood onto the floor in clumps. Freed from the vent, the creature's skeleton unfolded like a rotten flower, and an ear finally detached from the back of its head. It was a cat. My God, it was a cat. The one from next door. Its paws had been bound with something that looked like human hair, and its eyes had been ceremonially gouged out. Its broken jaw flapped around as I held it at arm's length, and something fell from beneath its tongue onto the floor. It looked almost exactly like an earthworm, but it just lay there, coiled and completely motionless. I leaned in and saw it was a bundle of rat tails, several of them all wound together in strange, interlocking circles and pinned together with a muddy brown strand of hair. The kids were in the basement, or at least I was told so. I knew teenagers liked to go down there to smoke, but the call I received from Mr. Anders mentioned small children playing with toys, which didn't sound right at all. Perhaps because the place scared me to death, but I couldn't imagine small children descending there as if it were a secret playground. The old man didn't specify exactly where the children were playing down there, and the basement was larger than it initially appeared. But I found myself heading straight for the old hole I had patched a few days prior. I had thrown quite a bit of poison down there, then sealed the gap with rubber cement and insulating foam before nailing a solid wooden board over it. I told myself that meant there were no more rats there, but I was hardly surprised to find the barricade torn apart and the foam and cement ripped out. But that wasn't all. The scratches had multiplied until dozens of ragged, repeating circles covered the floor and walls for over a meter in every direction. And I guess Mr. Anders had been right, because an old child's toy had been laid out and plugged into an open extension cord. It was a small playmat with different words and colorful shapes arranged in a neat grid. I had seen them before when my niece was a toddler. Her mother had used it to teach her to read. You could press any of the soft pads, and a pleasant voice would read the corresponding word and accompanying image. Why would anyone drag that down there? I couldn't say. But it gave me the creeps to see it laid out like that in front of the hole. I followed the extension cord to a wall outlet on the opposite wall and was about to unplug it when a robotic female voice emanated from behind. Apple, apple for apple. I spun around and saw a giant rat flash a look at me. Its black fur gleamed in the light. The bastard was terrifyingly huge, easily the size of an opossum, with its hindquarters hidden in the encroaching shadows. Normally, I wasn't afraid of rats, but the thought of that animal lunging at me with scissors-sharp teeth made me feel like I was facing a mountain lion. Apple for apple, it slammed the pads like an impatient child, and I would have laughed if I wasn't paralyzed with fear. I could feel it welling up anyway, this insane need to either burst into tears or cackle. Instead, I swallowed both the madness and the fear, and with trembling hands, damn it, damn it, damn it, I yanked the plug from the outlet and looked back towards the mat. The rat was gone. Did you see this guy? The words pulled me out of my thoughts about the repeating circles and jagged teeth. My dreams had taken a dark turn over the past few days, and not just because of the spread. A few days ago, the little girl I had helped with the rats in her room had gone missing, leaving her mother in a state of desperate grief. In fact, it had left most of us who knew her a bit shaken. "Excuse me," Mrs. Ruthers mentioned a strange man in the lobby last week. I was talking to a plainclothes police officer, and I knew from TV that meant she handled serious matters like the dead and abducted children. She looked like every teacher I'd ever had, only with far less patience. Yes," I said. He came in shouting about his dog, saying he was sleeping in the back alley when something snatched the dog through one of the air vents leading into our building. I actually tried to help him, tried to reason with him, but he just lost his temper and wouldn't listen. He only left after Al, that's my boss, threatened to call the police. "Can you describe this man?" I described him in great detail, his face and clothes, and I even managed to get some security camera footage to send over to the open room. I was trying my best to be helpful, but I think she could tell something was lingering in my mind. Maybe she thought it was nothing, or maybe she was just good at reading people because she never asked me directly. But I found myself blocking her path to the door just so I could confide. Listen, maybe this is nothing. But last week I called you guys about a dead cat. I'm sure there's a report somewhere. But you should know the cat was... someone killed it. They gouged out its eyes, broke its jaw, and there was something stuffed into its mouth." Her eyebrows raised. "In its mouth? What do you mean?" I reached into my drawer and pulled out the small bundle of rat tails along with the bent piece of metal. When placed side by side, their identical structure was even more pronounced, and it became clear how carefully they must have been constructed. "I found this in the drain," I said, "and this exact same shape was made of rat tails in the cat's mouth." "And you reported this?" "I did," I said. "It was tied with human hair, just like the cat's feet. It was the strangest thing, but it almost felt ritualistic. I don't know." I suddenly felt stupid just for saying those words out loud. I just thought that if there's some sick pervert lurking around, maybe he killed this cat first or something. "Not stupid at all," she said. "Good that you mentioned it. There's no way the original report would have made it to me, and you're right. This does feel ritualistic, doesn't it? My name is Chief Miles, by the way." Chief Miles reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card, which she handed to me. "If you see anything else like that, any other dead animals, or anything that makes you wonder exactly who might be living here, let me know. We need all the help we can get." "Mr. Anders," I said, knocking on the door, "open up, we need to talk to you." Chief Miles was beside me, along with two stern-looking uniformed officers. "You know, I really don't think this is right," I said, looking back at them. "Mr. Anders is a miserable bastard, but he's not, is he?" "That's not it," one of the officers replied. "You said the cat was in his apartment, and we traced some internet searches to this apartment that would make you seriously reconsider your opinion of the man. Mr. Graham, do you have the key we asked for?" "Of course," I said, holding up my master key before inserting it into the lock. It turned, and the bolt snapped back, and I found myself suddenly pushed aside as the 3 officers moved forward to make the arrest. "This is the police, Stephen Anders." "Jesus Christ!" I rushed in, slowing for a moment to take in the terrible stench, but still pressing forward. I almost ran into the backs of the 2 larger officers, while Chief Miles stood slightly ahead of them, her mouth agape and eyes wide. "They're coming, they're coming, they're coming." A dozen black rats poured out of the room and swarmed around our feet. Their greasy fur brushed against our clothes and tracked dirt onto our shoes. One of the officers started kicking and screaming, and he almost went down except his partner reached out and steadied him. The thought of him falling into that river of gnawing claws and squirming, muscular creatures terrified me, and I had to fight the urge to panic. "Calm down," I said. "They're just running, just let them go." When they finally passed, I was surprised to see Chief Miles still standing in the same spot, not moving an inch, even as dozens of tiny, disgusting creatures had crawled over her ankles. "They're coming, they're coming, they're coming." She looked almost catatonic, and that alone made my stomach drop to my feet. She didn't seem like the type of person who could be easily scared. Then again, I realized perhaps it wasn't easy at all. The room behind her was dark, the curtains drawn. I couldn't see what was inside. While the other 2 officers were concerned with each other, I slipped past and looked inside with my flashlight. At first, I didn't even know what I was looking at. The shoes on his feet let me know it was Mr. Anders lying on the floor, but the obese old man was otherwise unrecognizable. His living room had been cleared out, and his distorted body was laid out like some kind of display. Limbs and organs surrounded his dismembered torso in a few interlocking loops, all wrapped in thick, wet clumps of human hair. Around him were hundreds of small scratching circles that had been carved into the floor, with rat droppings contained in each one. "Pray," Chief Miles had said, and I literally jumped out of my skin. "They're praying," she said, her voice a small, scratchy whisper. A small, scratchy whisper, all of them whispering. "I hear them, I hear what they say, they're laid out like a ceremony all around him." I looked back at the sight and felt nauseous. Moving the flashlight a little further, I finally found Mr. Anders' head, or at least I thought it was his, as it had been gnawed clean to the bone. It was a gleaming ivory skull, brilliantly white in my light, positioned at the head of the circle, though slightly further back. "He's preaching, my God, he's preaching, and I can hear him," Chief Miles said, but I didn't look back. The skull was possessed. Something stood on it. Pink, wrinkled feet gripped his forehead and leaned forward like a priest giving a sermon. It must have been the same rat from the basement because it was terrifyingly huge, holding the man's head between its front paws as if preparing to pass a basketball. For a moment, it stared at both of us, revealing those miserable fangs in the light, each as long as a human finger, before it chittered and scurried into the dark corners of the living room. "Oh God," Miles shrieked, collapsing to the floor and seizing all my attention. "Oh God, it nests below." I suddenly found myself feeling incredibly frightened, and my terror turned hot and white as I heard 2 voices cry out from the hallway behind us. I had almost forgotten about the other police officers until they cried back, but instead of offering help, their robotic cries only made me feel like I was plunging deeper into madness. "It nests below," they shouted in unison, answering the woman's call like a religious prayer. "You shouldn't be here," I said as I turned to face the small boy. He had been sitting in the hallway, scribbling drawings when I first passed by, and even though I had much bigger problems on my hands, I couldn't leave him there. You should have an adult with you. It's not safe." "Mom's in the house," he said. "I know your mom, and she's not going to win any Parent of the Year awards. Nevertheless, I felt I should try anyway. You probably don't want to go in with your mom." He looked at me as if I were an idiot. Is she not feeling well again? Like last year. The last time I had to call an ambulance for her, the needles were still stuck in her arm." "You could say that," he replied, his eyes fixed on the paper lying flat on the floor. He held a black pencil in his clenched fist like a dagger, dragging it across the page so hard I wondered if he could make a mark on the floor. "Will the police come back?" he asked. "Probably," I said. "I think the detectives just need a rest. They say sometimes that happens to police officers. They work so hard to keep us safe."